Okay, hello, I'm back, and this is going to be the much more prescriptive half of this double video message. I've basically provided some background, given my reasons for making this video. So now I've got 3 important messages to deliver here. So I'm sure every one of us at some point has taken on a job which has proved to be wretched, for which we were completely unqualified, and we've bitten off more than we could chew, and we had to depart from that job and look for something more suitable. I think everybody at some point has made that mistake. We all make mistakes. But the important thing is, even if you have to leave your job for ethical reasons, I think the only exception which I would grant is it's acceptable to literally storm out of the place without any kind of process. Immediately walk out if you are being abused. One of my sister's friends, many years ago, when she was still a teenager, she worked in a shop, and there was a creepy middle-aged man who was being very predatory and was intimidating this girl. And she was based in this remote branch. She felt very vulnerable. She tried complaining to the management about it. Nobody was doing anything about it, and she just walked. And I think actually that's quite acceptable, but that's my own personal view. However, I'm going to get back to the subject here. So let's say you find yourself in a situation, you're desperate to just get out of there. You can't stand your job another day, okay? Now, there are 3 groups of people to whom I wish to deliver some tailored advice. Number 1, if you're currently in your job and it's stressing you out and you're finding it's increasingly unattainable, but you're still attending, you're still doing your shifts, then this video is definitely for you. My candid advice to you is, whatever you do not do what I did 19 years ago. Do not just jack your job and storm out the place. You have to do things by the book, but before you proceed to resign from your job and hand in your notice and everything, try to negotiate with your managers first. Now, what you should do at this point is, hopefully you've kept copies of all the paperwork which you signed when you commenced your job. Hopefully you might still have a copy of the original job advertisement with the person specifications. Go through the person specifications, look at the T's and C's, and try and compare and contrast with the actual conditions of your job. And then take everything with you and ask to speak to one of your managers and say, right, this job is not entirely what I expected it to be. And hopefully, if you've consulted your terms and conditions, the person specifications, you might find reasons which are not necessarily your own fault. And there might be a possibility that your manager or managers will recognize that you've been dropped in the deep end, or they're making unrealistic demands, and they might possibly negotiate with you. They might be prepared to make some modifications. Now, emotionally, if it's gone beyond that, if you really are experiencing a nervous breakdown, and if your job is just giving you grief to the point where you can't sleep properly, to the point where you can't think properly, and you're just breaking down in tears and stuff like that, at worst, my advice to you is do 2 things. Contact your doctor and ask to be signed off for stress. Okay, nowadays in the 2020s, there's a lot less stigma around mental health issues, certainly compared to 20 years ago, certainly compared to when I entered the workplace about 30 years ago. In the 1990s, men didn't talk about their feelings. And 20 years ago, I was in a competitive, high-stress office. It was dog eat dog. And if you couldn't stand the heat, you had to get out of the kitchen, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. When I left Loughborough, nobody cared. But I don't ever want you to find yourself in that situation. I don't ever want you to become like Mr. E, who's just completely jacked his career, stormed out the place, and now finds himself totally unemployed, unemployable, by the way, and going for broke with almost no savings. Now, in the last few weeks, at the place where I'm working, there's quite a few people who are facing redundancy. And I've overheard conversations, I'm not naming names. Some of them, they don't even have 3 months worth of savings. They probably couldn't survive off their savings for the next 3 or 4 months. And you don't ever want to be in that situation. Now, one thing which I've done over the course of my cleaning career these past 5 years is I've painstakingly been saving money in the bank. But that's mainly in preparation for if and when I get made redundant and I have to go searching for another career, have to start all over again. Now, that's just a fact of life in the workplace of today. There are no jobs for life. But anyway, that's a different topic. So if you're finding your job stressful and you're contemplating resigning from your job, what you must do first is try to get round the table and negotiate with your managers. And if you find that they are being recalcitrant and utterly unreasonable, then look for another job. Now, there was a guy called John who recently left my work site, and he landed himself a very good job. He'd been working in one of the offices on the site for the last about 10, 12 years, and he was absolutely miserable and fed up with his job. To the point where I remember towards last Christmas, he was telling me on passing that he was seriously thinking about just quitting, calling it a day, literally just grabbing his coat and walking out. And I sat down with him and said, don't do that. Keep looking for other jobs. He spent the whole of last year applying for loads of other jobs, attending a few job interviews, got rejected a few times, and he was getting very depressed towards the end of last year. And I said to him, look, it's frustrating, but keep going. Keep going. Whatever you do, if you're going to look for another job, don't quit your current job just now. Try, if at all possible, to land another job whilst you're still in your current job. It looks a lot better on your CV in the job interview room. Never, ever jump out without a parachute, because it'll look really, really bad. And when you go for a job interview, if you've just walked out of your job, you're going to have to explain. They will ask you, so why did you leave your last job? And you can't lie. You can't tell fibs, because you will get found out. I'm not going to go into details about that. I mean, it's common sense. Anyway, so that's my first message to people who are currently stressed out in their jobs, wanting to quit. My answer is, don't jump out. At worst, plan your escape, dig a tunnel, look for another job. And if you're absolutely stressed out of your eyeballs, go to your doctor and sign out. My second message is directed at, hopefully, a very small number of people who've reached breaking point literally within the last, I would say, 24 or 48 hours. Now, I've done this myself once. This is much more recently. Actually, I'll be honest, it was my current job. Not long after I started my current job, just over 3 years ago. I had a very, very bad day. Very, very bad day. And I just put on my jacket and I went home and I texted my manager and I said, I'm really sorry. Everything's just going wrong today. I've gone home and I'm going to think about my future. Words to that effect. And I kind of left the door slightly ajar. Because one thing I've learned over the years is if you have a really, really bad day in the workplace, if you drop something in the fire, sometimes you might just have a chance. You might be able to retrieve from the fire. You might just be able to salvage your job. But there is a very narrow window, very, very quick cooling period. And it's not guaranteed. If you walk out of the office, if you have a complete meltdown, if you have a really, really bad day and you just decide to go home, your managers might just turn around and just say, right, to hell with them, and you'll get the sack. So I absolutely do not recommend, never, ever, ever just walk out of the office. But if you have literally in the last few minutes or hours, in the last couple of days, my message to you is, all might not be lost. You might be able to save your job, but you have to get on the phone, you have to message your bosses, and you have to be prepared to swallow an awful lot of humble pie. You have to go back, and you have to toady and grovel and apologize for your behavior. You might be given a stay of execution. Your manager might be understanding, like my manager was 3 years ago, and give you a second chance. But once you have that second chance, you must never ever blow it again. But the thing is, if you just walked out of the office earlier today or yesterday, you have to take action very quickly, okay? You've probably woken up this morning and thought, oh my word, I've just jumped out with a parachute. I have almost no savings in the bank. I don't know how I'm going to survive the next few months. I could have lost an entire career. Panic, panic, panic. Right. You got to simmer down. You got to try and screw your head on and get on the phone. Don't just send a text or a message. You've got to get on the phone. The quickest, most direct form of communication. Get on the phone and say to them, I am so sorry for how I've behaved. I'd like to come in and renegotiate my current job, and I hope to try and save this job. And you've got to view this not just from your own point of view, you've got to see the organisation's point of view as well. Now, a lot of managers don't want to lose staff. They don't take pleasure in sacking people. Not least because when you lose a staff member, there's a lot of inconvenience comes with that. The remaining staff have to pick up that person's hours and duties, and then the managers have to go through the painstaking bureaucratic process of having to advertise the vacancy and have to interview people and hire a new recruit. I think in a lot of cases, your boss will want to avoid all that and maybe give you a second chance, but you have to act very quickly. It's a very short cooling period. I think that's all I need to say on that matter. If you've walked out the office literally in the last few hours. However, and this is my third and final message, and this is directed at those like Mr. E, like my father's friend's son, and I would say my 26-year-old self from all these years ago. If you've quit your job dramatically and suddenly in the last few days, weeks, certainly months, I have a very stark message for you. I would say 95% chance it's over. You'll probably never be able to retrieve that job, and you've probably blown your entire career. I want to make this clear. You have to be prepared for the future, because the future is going to be very grim in the months and years to come. You face a very long, narrow, winding road back to basically where you were, income-wise and all that. And honestly, I hope to God that you're not married, and I hope to God that you don't have kids, because they're going to suffer even more. Now, if you're like a teenager, if you're in your early 20s and you're still single and young and living with your parents, and you've completely tanked a job, well, okay, it's not the end of the world. But the thing is, if you completely jack in your job, my warning to you is you may be unemployed for a very long time to come. You could be unemployed for several months. Because in every single job interview which you attend, they will ask you, why did you leave your last job? Please tell us the circumstances. And they will winnow out the truth. And be prepared. I'm saying be prepared to get rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected. Be prepared. Because that's what happened to me throughout 2007 and 2008. Even in later years, so when I went for job interviews, that question kept cropping up again and again. Why did you leave that job? Don't ever fib, don't ever lie. But the thing is, I remember immediately after jacking in my career 19 years ago, I was unemployed, totally unemployed for 4 months. And then I had to take on a very different job. I became a night porter, and I had to basically start all over again. And that's the thing, is if you've completely tanked your career, you shall have to start all over again. You'll have to start at the very bottom. You'll be put to the back of the queue. It'll be a long time before you receive a job offer. And that job will probably be no more than a few hours a week, no more than a couple of shifts a week. Because at the end of the day, let's face it, employers, HR is like a portfolio. If you take on a high-risk asset, you're not going to invest an awful lot in that asset. And likewise, if you've recently completely stormed out of a job and jacked in your career, prospective employers, your future bosses, they're not going to give you much more than a few hours a week, a couple of shifts a week, because you're basically a high-risk asset. And you have to pay your dues to get back into the arena. You will have to work a minimum wage job. You will have to start at the very bottom. And most likely, it will not be a professional job. It will not be a well-paid job. And you will have to spend a long, long time working these part-time shifts, these little dribbles of work here and there, before they gradually trust you enough to increase your hours until you eventually progress to working full-time again, and it takes a long time. In the meantime, you have to cut right back on everything. You'll probably have to sell your car, like I did. You'll have to say goodbye to your social life. You'll likely have to live with your parents or relatives or friends, or you'll do sofa surfing, in which case you're living in somebody else's house or flat. And you're living in somebody else's place, you have to abide by their rules. It's their place and it's their rules. You have to go to bed when they go to bed. You have to get up in the morning when they get up in the morning. You've got to pay them rent. You've got to help with the domestic chores, okay? You have to behave yourself. You can't just invite your friends around. You can't just drink and watch TV and play video games. Especially when you've completely trashed your career. You have to say goodbye to all that, these liberties. And at the end of the day, it might not necessarily be your own fault for the fact that you had to depart dramatically from a job or a career even, but unfortunately, life's full of ups and downs, and you just have to take the rough and smooth. Alright, so esoteric vocabulary and Venn diagrams will be dubbed in later, but I think I've covered all the bases. I've said everything I need to say. So basically, the takeaway message, I think it happens to all of us at some point. We make a poor decision, we take on a job for which we're ill-suited, or we end up in a workplace working for an organisation which might even be unethical, and there may be moral reasons even why we have to quit a job. But you have to go about it the right way. You have to try and be rational in digging your tunnel and making your departure. You've got to make your departure professional. You've got to maintain integrity. You have to be honest, especially when you're applying for other jobs. Within reason, of course. I mean, don't just come across as a complete rat and a snitch. But you must not ever, ever jump out of a current job without a parachute. And if you're having a complete and utter meltdown, nowadays there's a lot less stigma against mental health. You can go to your doctor, get a sick note, sign off for stress. Sit at home and don't just sit all by yourself. You've got to speak with other people. Approach people, your friends, people in your family who've probably been through this situation before, and seek their advice. Okay, because I did it the wrong way. I went about it completely the wrong way 19 years ago. But 3 years ago, I went about it more sensibly. I had a really bad day. I walked out, went home, apologised to my manager, and then came back in the next day and we sat down and we renegotiated. And I saved my current job, which is why I've got savings in the bank, which is why I'm still working as a cleaner. I've held this job now for over 3 years. My brother, God be praised, he's now a senior manager. He has an excellent job. He managed to completely rebuild his profile. And his oldest son works a job now. He's finishing high school. There is hope. There are options. If you find yourself in an unbearable job and it's reaching the point where you just can't stand it much longer, don't go berserk. Just keep your cool. Look for other jobs. Try to negotiate with your managers, and there's plenty of advice here on the internet. When you're looking for other jobs, always maintain a positive approach. Don't just dwell on the negatives. Okay, I hope this may be of some help. I hope that none of you ever end up like Mr. E.